My name's David Watson. I'm Head of Campaigns at Downing Street, and I'd like to thank you all for choosing to come and spend some of your day here with us today, because ultimately what I'm here to talk about is exactly that: choice. Why do people make the choices that they do? How do people make the choices that they do? And if we can understand some of that better, how can we influence those choices for the public good? So that's what I'm going to give you about 30 minutes on. But before I do, actually, I just want to start off with a little video. Now, what we've got here is an experiment done by some Dutch scientists with some capuchin monkeys. The important thing to note before I play the video: the monkey on the left has been engaged in an experiment for a while, where it gets given a reward for doing a task. So the task is the scientist gives it a pebble. The capuchin has to give the pebble back. In return, it gets some food. In this case, a piece of cucumber. Now, what we're going to see from here on in is what happens when another variable is introduced into this, and what will happen to the capuchin's behaviour. And there we go.
Getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
So why have I shown you this? Well, capuchins reject unequal pay. But more importantly, two things. It's actually pretty good behavioural psychology to make you all laugh before I talk to you and bore you for 30 minutes. And secondly, what this shows in behaviour is the importance of context. Context is king. Behaviour can be changed very, very simply by a different environment, a different set of variables affecting the individual. And if any of us think that we're that different from capuchin monkeys, we probably need to think again. So, why is this stuff so important? Well, I think Jerry touched on a lot of this, so I won't kind of repeat what he's been saying. But just to say that I think you can be really reductionist about communications, and particularly government communications, and you can say that anything that we're doing can be put into one of four buckets: getting people to start doing something, stop doing something, do more of something, or do less of something. And actually, if you think about all the communications challenges that any of us face, then actually I think we can pretty much say we're doing one of those things. And that means that when we're doing things and we say, oh, what we're trying to do is raise awareness, I would always say, to what end? You were never just raising awareness. We're raising awareness in order to provoke behaviour or retard behaviour. And sometimes, of course, may not be looking at awareness at all, which I'll come on to. Now, with a lot of this stuff around behavioural theory, social psychology, call it what you may, you will hear some people kind of turn around and say, is this ethical? Should we really be trying to mess with people's brains like this? And I say to that, those people have got completely the wrong idea about what this is. It's about just going with the grain of how people think, rather than actually just focusing on what we want to do, what we want to say. It's about understanding what is most likely to get the right result. And you know, I think it's important for us to remember, as people working in public sector communications, that the public sector has an enormous track record here. Actually, a really big track record. We've probably got the biggest body of work that focuses on behaviour change communications than anybody else, any other communicator in the world. And that's something that's really important, because we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater with this kind of thing. In recent years, there's been a lot of focus by economists on this kind of area, and I'm sure you've all heard of the book Nudge. Some of you may have read Nudge. And what we've got here really is economists thinking they've invented marketing. And that's fabulous, actually. It's fabulous that the economists are interested in this stuff. We just have to sometimes remind them that we've been doing it for decades. But the key thing, I think, to say is that just because you're doing communications that might have a behavioural outcome doesn't mean necessarily that you're using behavioural techniques. So if you are trying to get people to stop drink driving, then you can just have more traffic police and arrest people more, and behaviour will change. But it doesn't mean you've used a behavioural approach to get there. So what I wanted to do today is take you through some of these concepts, show how they can apply to the kind of work that we do, and hopefully leave you with some new ideas that you can take back to the office. So, Homo economicus, or what's called rational man theory. Some of you may have heard of this, and Jerry's remarks started to touch on this a little bit. This is a theory in economics, which actually underpins a lot of modern economics, which is probably why the economists get so many things wrong, which fundamentally says that people are rational beings, and that if you put all the salient information in front of an individual, that individual will make the decision that is in their own best interest. That's how economic modelling is done. Unfortunately, it's not true. Because, think about it, everybody knows the damage that smoking cigarettes causes, and yet hundreds of young people take up smoking cigarettes every day. That's not a rational decision. There are other factors at play in that decision-making process. Lots of other factors at play. Some of them emotional factors, some of them conscious factors, some of them unconscious factors. Our job as communicators is to try and understand those factors that are influencing decision-making so that we can address them. And that, I think, is the really important thing. Now, I'd like to do a little experiment of my own to demonstrate this. Apologies for people who don't like football. This is a football-related experiment. So, team of your choice, whoever it is you support. It's the cup final. You're at Hampden. It's gone to penalty shootout. You're taking the penalty. Hands up who shoots to the left. One person. Hands up who shoots down the middle. Hands up who shoots to the right. Okay, and everybody else chickens out. Great, thank you. The reason I put it like this is because if you look at the statistics are very, very clear. 40% of the time, goalkeeper dives to his left, 40% to his right, and 20% the goalkeeper stays exactly stock still where he is. That means, statistically, your best chance of scoring a goal, scoring that penalty, is to shoot down the middle. But very few people do. And why? Why don't people shoot down the middle? And I'll give you the answer. Fear. Absolute fear of looking like a pillock. Because if you shoot down the middle, the goalkeeper just stands there and catches it, you are going to be vilified for years to come, potentially. So the fear of being an idiot means that you would rather shoot to the side, risk missing, risk having your penalty saved, but nobody will think badly of you because they'll say, oh, bad luck, rather than being brave and going down the middle. But of course, that's not a conscious process that goes on in the mind of that player stepping up to take that penalty. That happens entirely unconsciously. So really disproving this stuff around rational man theory. Now, some of you have read Nudge. I would also encourage people to read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Who's heard of this? 2 people, 3 people? This is fascinating stuff and really starts to talk about, well, lots of things, but in particular, the way in which we think and we make decisions. And it distinguishes between 2 different systems of thinking. We call System 1 and System 2, or fast and slow thinking. And it says that System 1 is the fast, automatic, intuitive, subconscious, unconscious way of thinking. And let me illustrate this. Who's driven home after a long day at work, got home, pulled into your drive or parked outside your house and thought, how did I get here? Yeah? That's because you've been doing System 1 thinking. And actually, the good news is that's a pretty damn safe way to drive. Actually, you're making lots of decisions, quite important decisions. You don't even remember those decisions because you're in a System 1 way of thinking. But if a small child had run out into the road, you would have totally remembered your drive home if you'd had to dodge them, because your brain would have switched to System 2 thinking. Slow, effortful, logical. And this is really important because it allows us to start thinking which category of decision falls into which kind of thinking system. And then we can try and affect those decisions in different ways. Let me give you another example. Actually, you can go and trial this if you like. If you don't believe me, if you don't believe Daniel Kahneman, you can try this. Go out into the park, right? Find yourself a nice, clear 100-metre space that you can walk. And walk purposely and time yourself and see how fast you walk. Turn around and ring up your boss and have a conversation about something really important, and then walk back through the 100 metres. You will be a lot slower because you've switched to System 2 thinking in order to have that conversation. And your brain can't make your feet work as well in System 2 thinking. It's a really interesting distinction between how different modes of thinking work. Who's familiar with this? Prochaska's stages of change model. If you're not familiar with it, you probably actually use it. It's a model that was created late 70s, 80s by Prochaska and his colleagues to model behaviour around addiction. So it's used a lot in health issues, in particular things like anti-smoking campaigns. But it's become more and more prevalent in lots and lots of different types of communications, and very prevalent in public sector communications. And it makes the argument that you need to move somebody through all of these stages in order to get to an action, to a behaviour. And that you can have communications interventions at each of these stages to move people along that journey. It's a very interesting model, and it works really well for certain things. But my contention is that it's become too prevalent in public sector communications. And if you've got communication strategies that are automatically defaulting to the idea of, right, our first job is we've got to create some noise about something, we've got to get attention, create awareness, then we've got to change attitudes about an issue, and then the attitudes will lead to a behaviour. Yeah? Does that sound familiar as a process that people go through? And it's based on the idea of cognitive dissonance. The idea that your brain doesn't like it if your behaviours don't fit with your attitudes. So if you change someone's attitude, their behaviours will fall into line with those attitudes. And it's a perfectly reasonable theory, and it works for a lot of things. But it's too prevalent, and there are different ways to achieve this. So, good example, recycling. You can use the Prochaska model, and if you want to get people to recycle more, tell them about the dangers to the planet, motivate them, persuade them that they should be concerned about that, look for opportunities to demonstrate the impact of recycling in mitigating dangers to the environment, and then hope that once people have those attitudes, that their behaviours, i.e. recycling more, will follow. You can do that. It's a damn complicated, long-winded process. Or you can just give people the opportunity to try the behaviour. Behavioural trialling. Try it out. Do something a bit different. Make the recycling bin slightly easier to use. And a lot of people, if you do that, will just adopt the behaviour. And what's really fascinating about that is then you get the cognitive dissonance in reverse. The behaviour is what you want. The attitudes are still where they were. The brain doesn't like that. So the person changes their attitudes to fit their new behaviour, the thing they've trialled doing. But the really fascinating thing is if you then ask somebody, well, why are you recycling more? They won't say, it's because the council made the bins easier to use. They'll say, I really care about the polar bear. So this idea that you have to go always through this staged process of awareness, attitude to behaviour, it's not true. Sometimes it's the right approach and sometimes it's not. So I just want to leave that as a thought with you. Go back and have a look at some of your strategies and think, are you defaulting to this stages of change model? And are there different ways that you could approach things? Now, I want to give you a couple of examples of communications that the UK government's done that don't work at all. So here is an infographic done by the Environment Agency trying to, as part of a campaign, trying to persuade people not to take the risk of driving through flooded roads. Now, some of you may not be able to see all the text if you're sat at the back, and I apologise for that. But this is incredibly unhelpful and counterproductive. Two reasons. First of all, it's just way too much going on. Just on a design point of view, which I'm sure Jerry would agree with. But secondly, and most importantly, 680,000 people would ignore a road closed sign and drive down a flooded road. 9,000 people get stuck. Do the maths, people. That's quite low chances of getting stuck. And most people will kind of go, I'll take that risk. I'm perfectly fine with that. Now, the reality is, this is 680,000 people who say they would do it, not did do it, but that doesn't matter. Because the brain doesn't want to kind of do all the rational thing. It just looks at those numbers and goes, hey, 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 good times. So this isn't working at all. So we did some work with the Environment Agency and hallelujah, they're not using this anymore. But a good example of how throwing information at people, facts, can sometimes work against the behaviour you're trying to encourage and not for it. So don't automatically assume that information is king, because it's not. Here's another example. I'm afraid this is very wordy. This is from the gov.uk website. And I'm picking on the Environment Agency today. This is another one of theirs. A public consultation, bird protection site, Falmouth Bay to St Austell. It's about, obviously, like all public consultations are, trying to get people to respond. But this isn't written in a way to encourage people to respond. How does it start? The formal consultation relating to the Falmouth Bay to St Austell potential special protection area is closing in 2 weeks. Is that encouraging you to join in, to write back, to share your views? Of course it's not. Of course it's not. Because this has been written by somebody whose mentality is, I need to run a consultation, not I want to seek the views of the public. They haven't thought about what is the behaviour that they want to encourage. They've thought about what is the process I need to go through. So they've come at this from a very selfish point of view. A simple rewrite of that first line to something like, you still have 2 weeks to have your voice heard on the Falmouth Bay to St Austell, blah, 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 is quite a transformative thing. So one of the important things that I want to stress with all this stuff on behavioural insights is that it doesn't cost anything to make your communications better. It's a thinking process, an analysis process of what you're doing, how is it working, and how can it be better. And if we can drive effectiveness through just a better approach, then that actually is much more valuable than getting given a slug more money from the policy team. So, we have launched this. This is our book, pamphlet, I should say. Government Communications Service Guide to Communications Behaviour Change, which I wrote in conjunction with my colleague Lester Posner from the Department for Work and Pensions. I have not brought 50 copies with me on the train because that would have broken my back. But you can download this online. If you go to the Government Communications Service website, just Google Government Communications Service, and you will find it pretty prominently on that site. Actually, I should at this point mention, because I would be crucified if I got back to the office and hadn't, that if you haven't joined the Government Communications Service, this is the sell part, then of course you should, because it is entirely free to join. It's for all public sector communicators in whatever role you're doing. It provides you access to lots of really good information, events, guides like this, all sorts of things. So please do sign up. So we've launched this. It's about 18 pages long. You can read it in your lunch break. And it is designed very specifically to kind of take some of the science out of this. Because there is so much science and academia behind all this kind of stuff. You can, if you want, go down the rabbit hole and read all the literature, read all the books. But the reality is, most of you don't have time for that, and I know you don't. I don't really have time for it, except the fact that I was given it as a project to do. What we're trying to do here is give you something that you can refer to, have on your desk, think, I just want to understand, how does this particular concept work, right? There's a little paragraph that tells me. So that's what it is. I would encourage you to download it and have a look at it. It replaces, incidentally, a previous version produced in 2008, I think, by the Central Office for Information, which was 120 pages long. So Lester and I applied some basic behavioural psychology and thought nobody's going to read 120 pages. That's not a very attractive proposition. Let's apply the actual thinking to what we're doing and have something that hopefully will appeal to people. So I encourage you to read that. Now, in this, the core element is recommending a behavioural framework called EAST, which has been created not by us, but by the government's Behavioural Insights team, specialist social psychologists, because that's not what I am. I'm a marketeer. I'm interested in this stuff purely for its application to my work, not as an academic. But these guys are the academics, and they came up with this, and I think it's really good. And what it basically says is, forget reading all the detailed stuff if you want. Actually, look at your communications and apply these 4 principles. Make sure something is easy, attractive, social, and timely. And if you work through those 4 areas, actually you can have quite a transformative effect upon how your communications will interact with the public. So, a lot of this is going to sound like motherhood and apple pie. But I'm going to say it anyway, because across government communications, this doesn't happen on a regular enough basis. So it might be motherhood and apple pie, but we need to get better at apple pie. Making things easy for people to do, actually, is a really, really simple thing that we can do. That consultation invite is a good example of that. That was not easy to respond to. It was complex. It was off-putting. It wasn't designed around the individual. Making things attractive actually has a tremendous effect on how people respond. There's a really good example from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So they send out the letters to people who have to file their self-tax returns. Does anybody do their own tax returns here? Yeah, a few? Yeah, there we are. Do HMRC work up here as the Scottish equivalent?
No, it's
It's HMRC. So some of you will have had those brown envelopes drop through the door. And they're pretty nasty looking, aren't they? You think, oh God, it's HMRC. And you kind of put it somewhere over there and think, I'll come back to that later. What that's doing is it's meaning that actually HMRC aren't getting responses in a staggered way through a period of weeks, which allows them to work through the responses in an ordered way. They get them all on deadline day. And of course that is really inefficient for them, and they have to hire more people and spend more public money to do that. They would much rather people respond earlier on. So they tried something quite interesting with a small sample of people. Instead of the normal nasty envelope, the brown envelope window with your name on it, HMRC logo on, they sent this out in a white envelope with some overprinting on it. Personalised overprinting in a nice friendly font. So if it had popped through Jerry's letterbox, it would have said something like, Jerry, you really should open this. And response rates in the first 2 weeks doubled. Remarkable change through making it more attractive. Now, of course, it costs a little bit more to have a white envelope rather than a brown envelope, and it costs a little bit of money to do the overprinting. But that's massively offset by the efficiencies in the process of doing that. So here's an example, and I think this is something that I'm going to come back to, where this is actually that kind of the area, the grey area between communications and operations. And as communicators, we should be getting into that space much more. We should be talking to our colleagues who do the operational side and saying, we can help you, because every time that there is an interaction with a member of the public, it's communications. Whether or not the communications team do it or not at the moment is irrelevant. That's a communication, and we can bring our skills and expertise to bear on that. Making it social is really interesting as well. And I know we've got some NHS people in the room, haven't we? Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm sure one of the things you'll know is that we lose a lot of money through people not turning up for their GP's appointments. Really, really frustrating thing. And another trial was done, which is fascinating, because normally you go see your GP, you come out, you see the receptionist writes down on a bit of paper the date and time of your next appointment, hands it to you, and that's how it works. They tried something different. The receptionist gave the individual the pen and paper and read out to them the date and time of their next appointment and got them to write it down and then to repeat it back. And the number of missed appointments fell dramatically. Why? Well, a number of reasons. Firstly, actually the act of writing it down lodges it in the memory better. That's a minor point. But much more important is the social contract that's formed between you as the patient and the receptionist. Because if you are just given the slip of paper and you don't turn up, then it's just the system, isn't it? It's just the system, thousands of people, it doesn't really matter. If you've told Bob the receptionist, I am coming on this date back to this practice, and you don't do it, then it's Bob you've let down. It's Bob you've lied to. And you break that social contract. And therefore, people are a lot less willing to do it. So, the last one, making it timely, pretty obvious. Easy, attractive, social, timely. Have a look at all of your work and think, how can I make it more easy, attractive, social, timely? Because there's always things we can do. Now, if I left you with nothing else other than the East model today, I'd be really, really happy. But there are some other things I'd like to talk to you about. We were saying earlier that there are all these different factors that influence how people make decisions. And it's quite hard sometimes to think, well, which of these do I try and focus on? Because there are so many. And there's a really interesting exercise that you can do that I found really, really helpful, which is, first of all, a categorization exercise, dividing up the factors which you think are currently influencing the behaviour into 3 areas: personal, social and environmental factors. And you can get your policy experts to take part in this as well, because the reality is they have all this information buried deep in their brains. They just don't normally know how to express it. Everyone knows that one. So actually a piece of A4 paper, divide it up into 3 sections and just write down all the things which could conceivably be affecting the behaviour that you're interested in. Write them all down and then circle the ones which you think are most amenable to a communications intervention. And then before you know it, you've got the basis of your plan. You think, right, these are the areas which we're going to tackle. These are the areas which we're going to focus on. That's proven really useful for me in a lot of the things that I've been doing. So I'm working right now on a project on superfast broadband, getting people to take up superfast broadband and looking at all the reasons which are affecting that decision. And there are so many. You know, price, location, do you have kids, what sort of work do you work from home, all these kind of different things. But where we've come out so far, we've got an agency pitch today which will probably change everything. Where we've come out so far is actually in a much different place, which is about talking about the idea, or the emotional idea of being super fast, of wanting to be in that super fast place, to have a super fast lifestyle. Because we're not trying to get everybody to do this, we're just trying to move from early adopters to early majority. And that exercise really helped with that process. Now, what are some of these factors? Well, let's talk about some of the big ones. Habit and routine. We are all creatures of habit, and habits affect massively the way in which we behave. Now, from point of view of communications, this can mean one of 2 things. Sometimes we want to break a habit, like smoking. I want to help people break that habit. And that's really one of the toughest jobs in communications, to get people out of a habitual behaviour. And 9 times out of 10, you need something very interruptive, very disruptive, because you've got to grab that attention. You've got to really get people to focus on something, to make a very conscious decision to break with probably quite an unconscious, habitual set of behaviours. Conversely, you can create habits. Now this is really interesting. So the Fire Kills campaign, I've got about 5 minutes, but seeing as you took 10 of mine, Jerry, I'll use my 5. The Fire Kills campaign did something really, really interesting. This is a domestic fire safety campaign which tries to encourage people to test their smoke alarms. And the reality is, the best advice from the fire brigades is test your smoke alarm every week. Nobody tests their smoke alarm every week, or very few people do, because it's completely counterintuitive. You test your smoke, because the argument is you need to test your smoke alarm to keep yourself and your family safe from an accidental house fire. You test your smoke alarm, right, great, haven't died this week. You forget to test your smoke alarm that week, probably also haven't died that week, and therefore the reward is missing. I carried out the behaviour, I didn't get a reward for doing that. Back to our capuchins. So why would you carry on doing it? So actually, people fall out of the habit of, or never adopt the habit of testing weekly. What you can do is piggyback on another habit. So this Sunday, we're changing the clocks. And the idea of testing your smoke alarm when you change the clocks is a really interesting thing. And we've now got to the point where we're getting really high levels of people adopting that habitual behaviour. Because actually, you go around the house looking for small things about that size with a dial on to fiddle with. That's very similar behaviour to testing your smoke alarm. So adding it in to that habitual behaviour is really interesting. Self-efficacy is another one, very quickly, just to talk about, which is the basic principle of, if I don't believe I can do this, I'll never try. And this can be an overriding factor in influencing behaviour. So it doesn't matter how persuasive our arguments, if the individual in question has a lack of belief in themselves, nothing will work. So if you think that's a factor influencing behaviour, you need to go straight here in communications. You need to go straight to building up their sense of belief in themselves, their self-efficacy. So for example, I will never go bungee jumping because I have no belief in my ability not to die. Heuristics, shortcuts, mental rules of thumb. The most famous public sector one, of course, being eat 5 a day. That's a heuristic, a shortcut, because actually there's got to be an objective difference in the health benefits from eating a banana to a courgette to a apple or whatever it might be. But we don't bother with that. We just go, it's one of my 5 a day, it'll do. Because our brain's quite happy to make that, that shortcut. Another good example from the private sector world, of course, Alexander the meerkat. Yeah, we all love Alexander, don't we? Alexander is a heuristic. He's a mental shortcut so that when you come to that point where you think, I need to get some car insurance, Alexander pops up in your head and without a very conscious, considered, thoughtful decision-making process, you go to compare the market rather than to go compare. Now, the crucial thing about this, of course, is that this is a low importance decision. It doesn't really matter which of these comparison websites you go to. So you're quite happy to allow your decision to be influenced by a comedy cartoon meerkat. If, on the other hand, the agency that did that work, VCCP, had proposed doing that exact same structure, exact same type of ad, to sell a car, it would have been a disaster. Because as individuals, we would have all turned around and gone, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to make a big important decision like that based on a comedy cartoon meerkat. So the distinction there between high value, high importance decisions and low value, low importance decisions, and in terms of which factors come into play and which kind of techniques you can use are really, really important. And the penultimate one, before I get dinghied again, biases. We've all got biases. We don't know what most of them are. It's very hard to recognise our own biases. We know, for example, that lots of research says most people, when they're interviewing, end up trying to hire somebody who reminds them of themselves. It's an unconscious bias. But another really interesting one for us is the bias towards short-term gratification rather than long-term reward. So if I was to stand up here, I'm not going to do this because I'm not rich enough, and offer you all £10 now or £20 in a year, most of you would take the £10 now. Possibly because you don't trust that I'll be back in a year, but primarily because you've got a bias towards short-term gratification. So we know that this is particularly interesting on things like pensions and how we drive behaviour on pensions and encouraging pension uptake. Last slide. Social norms. We are all part of social groups. Those groups have norms and those norms direct behaviour. So we are a social group today and there are certain things expected of us. And particularly of me, seeing as I'm at the front and talking to you all. And that is driving my behaviour into a particular pattern, whether I like it or not. But if I, on Saturday, go on the football with a different social group, a different set of cultural norms and different set of expectations, I will behave entirely differently. And frankly, if I turned up at the football, dressed like this, talking very politely, I might get in trouble with my social group. Conversely, if I turned up today and behaved like I would on Saturday, I don't think you'd be very impressed. So those social norms, the social groups, drive behaviour so much. So some really interesting work being done at the moment on sexual violence towards women and girls. Targeting, obviously, kind of teenage boys. And this is fundamentally based on ideas around social norms. And what is the social norm in those groups of teenage boys? And how can you really try and turn that social norm on its head? Because that is the thing that's driving those behaviours so hard.